There is a root buried beneath the prairie grasslands of North America that once meant the difference between life and death for countless generations. It sustained entire nations through brutal winters when snow blanketed the plains and game grew scarce. The Lakota people called it timpsula. The Dakota knew it as tipsina. French traders who encountered it named it pomme blanche, the white apple. Today we know it scientifically as Pediomelum esculentum, though it was once classified as Sorrelia esculenta. But regardless of the name, the prairie turnip remains one of the most remarkable and overlooked foods in American history, a plant so vital to indigenous survival that its very existence shaped where tribes chose to hunt, where they established camps, and how they organized their entire calendar year around its harvest. When Lewis and Clark made their famous expedition across the American West in 1805, they recorded observations of Plains Indians collecting these roots, carefully peeling away their outer skin and frying them over open fires. The explorers noted how systematically the women gathered these tubers, how methodically they prepared them, and how central the prairie turnip seemed to be to the diet of every tribe they encountered. The city of Topeka, Kansas, derives its very name from this humble root. In southern Siouan languages, the name translates roughly to a good place to dig prairie turnips. That a major American city would carry this meaning in its name speaks volumes about just how important this single plant was to the people who first called these lands home. Despite its common name, the prairie turnip is not actually a turnip at all. It belongs to the legume family, making it more closely related to beans and peanuts than to the turnips you might find in a grocery store. The plant forms a long, thin, edible tuber that grows approximately 4 inches below the surface of the soil. Its native range stretches across an enormous swath of the continent, from Manitoba in the north down to Texas in the south, and from Wisconsin in the east all the way to Montana in the west. It thrives in full sunlight on well-drained, rocky or sandy soil, the kind of terrain that characterized the vast prairies that once covered the heartland of North America before European settlement transformed the landscape forever. The nutritional profile of the prairie turnip helps explain why it was considered the most important wild food gathered by the Lakota and many other plains tribes. The root contains approximately 7% protein and more than 50% carbohydrates, making it more nutritious than most cultivated root crops. It is rich in vitamins and trace minerals that were otherwise difficult to obtain on the prairie. Perhaps most critically, the prairie turnip contains around 17.1 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams. This might seem like a minor detail, but it was actually a matter of life and death. During the long winter months, when diets consisted almost entirely of meat preserved from the autumn hunts, vitamin C deficiency posed a serious threat. The prairie turnip provided exactly what the winter diet lacked. There is another nutritional advantage that modern science has helped us appreciate even more. Unlike potatoes and many other starchy foods, the complex carbohydrates in prairie turnips do not cause the rapid spikes in blood sugar that can lead to metabolic problems over time. This was food that provided sustained energy without the crashes and cravings that come with simpler carbohydrates. For people who needed to remain active and alert throughout the harsh winter months, who needed energy that would last from sunrise to sunset during hunting expeditions and daily survival tasks, this slow-release energy was invaluable. The genius of the prairie turnip extended beyond its nutritional content to its remarkable capacity for preservation. The women who gathered these roots developed sophisticated techniques for storing them through the long winter months. They would slice the tubers and lay them out in the sun to dry. They braided them together and hung the braids on meat racks where the air could circulate freely. They pounded the dried roots into flour that could be stored indefinitely. Large quantities of processed prairie turnips were packed into buffalo skin bags and cached away for the lean times ahead. Historical records from explorers, traders, and early settlers contain numerous accounts of both Indians and whites subsisting on stored prairie turnip for extended periods during times of famine when other food sources failed. The ways in which the prairie turnip was prepared for eating were as varied as the tribes that relied upon it. The root could be eaten raw, providing a crisp and slightly sweet flavor that some compared to raw turnip or jicama. It could be boiled until tender, or roasted in the embers of a fire until the flesh turned soft and fragrant. The dried root was often crushed into a fine powder that could be stirred into soups and stews, thickening the broth while adding nutrition and flavor. One particularly beloved dish was a pudding made from dried prairie turnip flour mixed with serviceberries, a combination of textures and tastes that balanced starch with fruit in a way that satisfied both hunger and the desire for something sweet. Even today, prairie turnip flour is still used as what some describe as a secret ingredient in traditional Indian frybread, connecting contemporary indigenous cuisine to practices that stretch back countless generations. The prairie turnip carried meaning that extended far beyond mere sustenance. Among the Blackfoot people, legend held that the prairie turnip was brought to earth from the sky by a woman who had married the morning star. According to the story, she was ejected from the heavens when she committed the forbidden act of digging up one of these sacred roots. This origin story tied the humble tuber to the cosmic order itself, to the stars and the supernatural forces that governed existence. During the Blackfoot sun dance ceremony, the most sacred ritual in the tribe's spiritual calendar, the opening ceremony involved the exchange of symbolic bundles. Some participants wore elaborate headdresses constructed from bundles of prairie turnip roots, marking the plant as holy enough to adorn those engaged in the most important religious observances of the year. The cultural significance of the prairie turnip shaped practical decisions as well. The locations where these roots grew most abundantly influenced where tribes chose to establish their hunting grounds. A territory rich in prairie turnips was worth defending and returning to year after year. The work of gathering belonged primarily to women, and this labor was considered of tremendous importance to the welfare of the entire community. Lakota women passed down knowledge across generations, teaching children that prairie turnips point to each other. Young ones would observe the direction that the branches of one plant pointed and search in that direction for the next, following an invisible network that connected plant to plant across the prairie grassland. If the prairie turnip was so valuable, so nutritious, so culturally significant, why can you not find it in any grocery store in America today? The answer lies in the fundamental incompatibility between this wild plant and the demands of modern commercial agriculture. A prairie turnip takes between 2 and 4 years to grow from seed to a mature root ready for harvest. Compare this to a commercial turnip, which matures in just 45 to 70 days. A farmer planting prairie turnips would need to maintain a 3 to 4 year rotation simply to reach peak production. The economics of modern farming make such patience nearly impossible. Land, equipment, and labor all cost money. No commercial operation can afford to wait 4 years for a return on investment when other crops will pay in a matter of weeks. The prairie turnip also resists the kind of cultivation that has made other crops successful. It does not transplant well because of its long taproot, which reaches deep into the earth and is easily damaged when disturbed. It is not included in commercial seed mixes sold to farmers and gardeners. Even when it is planted intentionally, it often fails to establish itself successfully. The plant evolved to thrive in very specific conditions, in prairie soils that had developed over thousands of years, in ecosystems where grasses and forbs and grazing animals all played interconnected roles. Removing it from that context and placing it in a farmer's field disrupts the delicate balance that allowed it to flourish in the first place. Beyond the challenges of cultivation lies an even more fundamental problem. The habitat where prairie turnips once grew abundantly has largely disappeared. Finding a prairie turnip in the wild today means standing on a remnant of original prairie that has never been plowed under. Across the vast majority of its former range, the native grasslands have been converted to farmland, replaced by corn, wheat, soybeans, and the many other crops that now dominate American agriculture. Where millions of acres of prairie once stretched to the horizon, only scattered patches remain, protected in preserves or surviving on land too rocky or marginal to be worth cultivating. Even where prairie turnips still grow wild, locating them requires knowledge and skill that few people possess anymore. The plant has evolved a remarkable survival strategy that makes it exceptionally difficult to find. Shortly after flowering, the entire above-ground portion of the plant breaks off at ground level and blows across the prairie like a tumbleweed, scattering seeds as it travels. This means the window for spotting and harvesting prairie turnips is extremely narrow. Miss the brief flowering period, and the plant effectively vanishes, leaving no trace to mark where the valuable root waits below the surface. The loss of the prairie turnip is part of a much larger story of vanishing food diversity. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, approximately 75% of plant genetic diversity has been lost since the early 1900s. We have traded a world of countless local varieties adapted to specific regions and conditions for a handful of standardized crops grown on an industrial scale. This narrowing of our food base has consequences beyond just the disappearance of interesting flavors. It represents a loss of nutritional options, of potential medicines, of genetic resources that might prove valuable in ways we cannot yet foresee. For Native American communities, this loss carries an additional weight. The forced abandonment of traditional diets rich in wild game, buffalo, and gathered plants like the prairie turnip has contributed to devastating health outcomes. Obesity, diabetes, and heart disease now afflict indigenous populations at rates far exceeding the national average. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence suggest that the Plains Indians who subsisted primarily on buffalo and wild foods like the prairie turnip rarely, if ever, suffered from these modern afflictions. The main diet that sustained their ancestors through countless generations has been replaced by processed foods and commodity ingredients that the human body was never designed to handle. But the story of the prairie turnip is not simply one of loss and decline. Across Indian country, a movement is growing to reclaim traditional foods and the cultural knowledge that surrounds them. Tribal farms like Rebel Earth Farms are deliberately cultivating wild foods that were once gathered from the land. Scientists working with indigenous communities have established garden plantings to evaluate whether the prairie turnip might be domesticated without losing its essential qualities. The hope is that this ancient food could provide a new and valuable crop not just for indigenous gardeners, but potentially for commercial producers willing to take a longer view than conventional agriculture typically allows. This effort is a quiet revival of knowledge and practice. There are also economic opportunities emerging around traditional plant knowledge. Medicinal herbs and teas derived from native plants offer commercial possibilities for local producers on tribal lands. The same traditional ecological knowledge that once guided the gathering of prairie turnips can inform new enterprises that honor indigenous heritage while creating sustainable livelihoods. Food sovereignty, the right of peoples to define their own food systems, has become a rallying cry for communities determined to restore what was taken from them. The prairie turnip asks us to reconsider what we value in our food system. Here was a crop that nourished people for thousands of years, that carried spiritual meaning alongside nutritional value, that could be preserved through the harshest winters and provide sustenance when all else failed. Yet it could not be controlled the way annual crops can be controlled. A plant that takes 4 years to mature cannot be rushed, optimized, or bent to the demands of quarterly earnings reports. Perhaps that is precisely why it was pushed aside, why the knowledge of where to find it, how to harvest it, how to preserve it through the winter months has nearly disappeared from the collective memory of this continent. But knowledge can be recovered, seeds can be planted, traditions can be taught to new generations. The prairie turnip endures in those scattered remnants of unplowed grassland, waiting beneath the surface for someone who remembers how to find it. Tribal communities across the Great Plains are working to bring these foods back, not merely as historical curiosities or museum pieces, but as living elements of a culture that refuses to be erased. They are doing this work not just for nutrition, though the health benefits are real and documented. They are doing it for something harder to measure, but no less important. They are doing it for cultural sovereignty, for the right to eat as their ancestors ate, to gather as their grandmothers gathered, to pass down knowledge that connects them to the land and to each other in ways that cannot be replicated by anything found on a grocery store shelf. The prairie turnip may never appear in supermarket produce sections, but its story is far from over.